As we begin our journey into the Cthulhu mythos and the works of H.P. Lovecraft, I was immediately faced with a dilemma, the dilemma of where I should begin, but after some contemplation there was only one real answer, with the great sleeper himself, the great dreamer of Earlier, the great Cthulhu. Now, having an entire mythos named after him, you'd expect Cthulhu to heavily feature in numerous works of Lovecraft, but that isn't the case. Cthulhu's only appearance of any real note was of course in the Call of Cthulhu. The story itself is told from varying accounts, and the style is quite similar to something you'd expect from a documentary, using the letters and manuscripts of several characters. It is from the Norwegian sailor Gustav Johansen that we are provided with a first-hand account of his terrifying encounter with Cthulhu. With Johansen and the rest of his crew awaking Cthulhu from his slumber, realizing the mistake they had made, they attempted to flee, but many of them were slaughtered in the process. Eventually Johansen and the rest of the crew decide that they have to face the monster head-on, ramming their boat straight into Cthulhu. At first this appeared to have worked, splitting Cthulhu's head open. However, upon seeing the Great Old One regenerate and begin to reform, they realised that this was a beast unlike any they had encountered previously, and decided it would be best to evacuate. Johansen survived long enough for his accounts of the terrifying events that took place that day to be found, and arguably this is where our fascination with Cthulhu began. Lovecraft only mentioned Cthulhu and the Great Old Ones in passing. He created a very loose pantheon consisting of ancient deities that were not from our world. It wasn't until the later years when writers such as August Derleth, Robert E. Howard, Neil Gaiman, Robert Bloch, and a host of others really began to develop the ideas that Lovecraft had introduced. The name Cthulhu is believed to have derived from the classical Greek word chthonic, meaning subterranean, which refers to something that exists under the Earth's surface, being secret and concealed, which is a description that fits Cthulhu quite well, considering he could be found sleeping deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. As I mentioned in my previous video about Lovecraft, Cthulhu was actually meant to be pronounced in an alien tongue. Lovecraft himself used several different pronunciations over the years, with the most common being Cthulhu. But as you can imagine, talking in an alien tongue just isn't very practical, especially when it sounds like you're about to cough up a furball. So the pronunciation that is widely accepted and used today is of course Cthulhu. In the years that followed Lovecraft's passing, there were dozens of authors that included Cthulhu in their stories, and attempting to look just for one backstory to consider canon doesn't really work. There were numerous authors that describe Cthulhu in a variety of different ways, with his personality, motives and appearance varying in their own unique manner. And to me that's what makes the work of Lovecraft and all those that followed so great. We have this base foundation that's been laid by Lovecraft, but all of these characters can be interpreted in the way you see best. So I guess what I'll be discussing is the few things that people mostly agree on. We know that the Great Old Ones are described as coming from the stars, but what exactly does that mean? Cthulhu is believed to have been born on the planet Vol, located in the 23rd Nebula. He is part of an alien race known as the Great Old Ones, though Cthulhu was never really considered a god like the rest of them. He was instead considered a priest, with one of his many titles being Cthulhu, High Priest of the Great Old Ones. Cthulhu is described by Lovecraft as being neither male or female, though in the later years the sentiment emerged that he was the brother and father of himself as he impregnates his daughter Cthulhu. Cthulhu is referred to as a female, so because of this I'll be referring to Cthulhu as a he for the rest of the video. Cthulhu was a child of Nug and Yeb, making his grandparents Yog-Sothoth and Sheb-Negoroth, meaning his great-grandparent was Azathoth. Cthulhu did have numerous children, and when travelling to the planet of Zoth he came across Idya, whom he would mate with, creating 4 children. Gatanathoa, the dark god and the firstborn of Cthulhu, Yog-Thogtha, the second son, Zothamog, the third son, and Cthulhu, the secret one, the daughter tasked with regenerating her father, should he ever be slain. Accompanying Cthulhu and his children as they travelled the universe was the Starspawn of Cthulhu, a shape-shifting alien race that resembled Cthulhu but were much smaller in size. Whether these beings were the actual spawn of Cthulhu or just an alien species that was similar in appearance that chose to worship the priest is unknown. When Cthulhu and his followers arrived on Earth, they built the great city of Earlier, a city built of enormous emerald stones and statues that honoured the great Cthulhu, a city that was often referred to as the Great Corpse City of Earlier. Not long after arriving, they encountered an alien species known as the Elder Ones, or the Elder Things, which had colonised and lived on Earth for over 1 billion years. The Elder Ones and the Starspawn of Cthulhu went to war, and despite their numerous conflicts, they eventually agreed to live in peace together. Cthulhu and his Starspawn would have reign over the newly formed landmasses, and the Elder Ones would rule the ancient landmasses around the regions of Antarctica. Cthulhu eventually fell into a deep slumber, and watched over human civilization as they advanced and developed over the years. He did however maintain contact with humankind through their dreams, and slowly began to create the cult of Cthulhu. The great city of Earlier would eventually sink into the depths of the sea, for reasons that many have speculated about, ranging from alien attacks to natural disaster. Cthulhu and his children remained trapped, waiting for a time when the ancient city would resurface. The cult of Cthulhu were left waiting for the sunken city of Earlier to rise, and for the Great Old Ones and mankind to finally become one. With so many deities that featured in his mythos and a bunch that came before Cthulhu, Why exactly is Cthulhu the most well known to us, and why does he have an entire mythos named after him? I've yet to mention the appearance of Cthulhu, and that's because I feel Cthulhu's appearance is one of the main reasons that he became so popular. Many of the deities that feature in the Cthulhu mythos often appear as a combination of tentacles, eyeballs, and bubbling goo, and to be honest, half the time it's quite difficult to distinguish between the deities. This is an issue that we don't have with Cthulhu. Despite the fact that he features in tons of stories from all sorts of universes and time periods, his appearance remains extremely recognisable. In the Call of Cthulhu, he is described as being a monster with a vague anthropoid outline, anthropoid meaning it somewhat resembles an ape or a human. His head was that of an octopus, with a host of tentacles acting as feelers. He had claws on each hand and each foot, with a pair of very basic wings that didn't look like they were capable of flight. The main defining feature of Cthulhu is the fact that he just looks like a giant octopus man, with tentacles surrounding his mouth, and no, I'm not referring to Davy Jones. The artistic interpretations of Cthulhu vary as much as the stories he features in, but whether he appears as a giant statue or a cartoon character, it remains very easy to tell that what you are looking at is in fact Cthulhu. Now if you're anything like me, you may not be a huge fan of the ocean, or more specifically what we cannot see in the depths below. Lovecraft's work is based off the fear of the unknown, the fear of these unknown powerful beings that we are unaware of. If you combine this fear with an already existing fear that we have, such as what lies beneath the ocean, you now have a fear that is familiar but yet still unknown, making it easier to understand and relate to, which is exactly what we have with Cthulhu. Many would regard a monster such as Cthulhu as innately evil, but he is a being that we cannot truly comprehend, a being whose motives and ethics we will never understand. He is neither good nor bad. The realms of good and bad as we know it do not apply to Cthulhu. Cthulhu has become somewhat of a staple in pop culture. There is an endless list of games, movies and books that feature Cthulhu and his mythos. If there are any stories that you've recently read that feature Cthulhu that you think might be worth sharing, then please do so in the comments below. If enough people agree, then there may be a future reading. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.